dad's probably gonna join me. Is it okay, Joe? Tea, I can't drink coffee. Yep, it's in the kitchen by the sink by the coffee maker. So if you look past where the coffee stand is out there, there's a sink back there at the coffee maker, and by the sink is a glass jar.
Hi, how are you? Good.
And then they have a hot water spout. Well, so, no, there's like a lunch. Oh, I heard that's what. And then there's a hot water spout on the side of the coffee.
I know. We have 2 sheets.
That's so funny.
Oh, no.
Hey, and then that's morning. I'm like,
Espionage. Uh-oh.
I did, I finished it. It's going pretty good. He starts enjoying it. I'm having fun. No, I'm training on day. I'm training on day shift. And I don't head out.
Oh, no, it says first series.
Oh, okay, good.
I guess I said
First series.
it had to rock.
Okay.
Yeah, what part of the Bible is that one?
I don't know, where did that word come from? What does that mean?
Did they just have the long piece? I was connected, which is
I don't know, we'll have to ask Pastor because he did it. He's teaching.
Yeah, because this is, it says the same stuff that we have.
Yeah, so I think it's second Samuel.
It's a type. Take a picture of rats.
Real politic? I don't know.
I don't know what it is.
And this right here, what the heck is that word?
I was looking at it, it says Absalom in first.
Turn it over.
Okay, okay, real politic.
Is that like somebody's name?
Sounds more political to me.
You know, I sometimes wonder, how did they come
That
up
was
with
one of
these
those that
words?
had action.
Like push, whatever his name is. Act right?
That took them.
No.
Some of the names are really.
I do too, because I don't know phonics. I don't know phonics very well.
Yes.
What is this?
It's our Bible is that one.
Realpolitik. Yes, that's a different language, it's German. Realpolitik. So realpolitik means the kind of ruling that has little to do with ethics and everything to do with practicality. The Germans would call it realpolitik.
I guess we'll find out.
Sounds like a modern TV show.
Could be Jerry Springer.
I don't think that's old history now, isn't it?
I know.
Do you know my personal claim to fame is I one time was working someplace and Jerry Springer came on and I knew the 3 people that were on it. They worked at a place in Watertown, Wisconsin, and then you also knew right away because if you ever wondered how fake are those shows? Yeah, these 3 people were pretending to be people completely different. 2 were supposed to be married, and it's just none of it was true. It was just,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
I knew someone whose
So there
mother
was-
took her on the Geraldo repair.
really. That's as close as I got to fame.
Oh, yours, buddy.
Oh, I lost it. I didn't realize that was about faith.
I don't think I did.
I started it.
Okay, you ready? How do you say this person's name?
She says just as good.
Okay.
I love your earrings.
They don't have to sit together.
Did a good job, right, Doris?
Yeah.
joining book club, right?
And the ones I have are fairly pumpkin. I don't know if I'm just have to get used to it, or if I need to start looking at it. It's only been 2 days. Steel toes. Probably. It would be nice where I could just see these step in place, but some of the stuff requires kind of interest. You have to put your tools on and you have to put it on a certain way.
So do people really think about it?
Standing still, start facing it, and
I think I would.
You have to be a certain zip code.
yeah.
Which I need, but we don't have that. You can be the first, probably. No. First 100 people.
I'm still, I had yeah, I'm gonna ask how often. I would just get new shoes every time. I need a certain amount of time. Just recommended stuff.
Hi, I'm Will's President Mark Schroeder. Certainly staying close to our Savior through His gospel and word and sacraments is vital for all of us. But there are certain groups of people for whom that's harder to do in a traditional way. For those groups, Wells has various special ministries to keep them connected to Jesus, including to our brothers and sisters in the military.
In a family where dads did
Your
well.
church. Yeah. Oop. Did I do that?
That's not. Special needs computer.
I guess.
It is. For mine, anyway.
Wow. All right. Give me a second.
Things can sometimes be uncertain and uneasy.
Deployments are now much more contingency focused as we take a look at what's going on in the news with various countries around the world.
Because, for this Wells family just outside of Savannah, Georgia, Dad could be sent overseas for months or even a year at a moment's notice, forcing him to miss birthdays, holidays. He's even had to miss the birth of one of his children.
There have been a lot of conversations with the kids because it changes daily, you know. So just kind of being ready for anything.
Michael Hefty has served in the United States Army for the last 16 years. Over that span of time, he's been deployed 4 times and assigned to 10 different duty stations. Most of those moves happening with his wife and children.
There was a period where we moved 4 years in a row. Each duty station was just a year, and that was a little much.
At the moment, the Hefty family is blessed with a Wells church just half an hour away from home, providing regular opportunities to worship the Lord and study His Word with fellow believers, as well as strong Christian support during this time of uncertainty. But that hasn't always been the case.
We have found personally that there is a big difference between live streaming and being able to meet in person and strengthen each other in the faith through that fellowship and through being able to take communion together in person.
And so, thankfully for the Hefties and hundreds of other Wells families in the military stationed at home and abroad, Wells Ministry to the Military offers opportunities for Christian support.
Our job, our responsibility to our military
families is just be there, just to be present, to listen, to reach out and not just assume that everything's okay, especially when someone in the family deploys. That our congregations just rally around those people and support them.
WELL's ministry to the military works to provide service members and their families with resources in support of their spiritual welfare. In addition to print materials such as military-themed devotions and prayer booklets, the ministry also provides personal connections, whether that's to a WELL civilian chaplain or to a military contact pastor.
And these are pastors that serve in congregations that are located near military installations. Without having that understanding myself from personal experience to know what it's like to be in the military and what are the best ways that we can serve them. I think that's just helpful to have those resources, and I don't have to figure it out myself.
If a WELL's member serving in the military reaches out to their local military contact pastor, there's a chance that the pastor might be able to come on base.
There was one recruit in particular that followed the protocol exactly. And so because of him, he's the one that got me on base for the Lord's Supper. And through that one connection, me being on base that one time, has now opened up the door for me to lead a Lutheran service on base every Sunday.
The isolation and other struggles that these families face can make something like a deployment even harder than it already is. And that's where the support of WELL's ministry to the military can be so important.
Our pastor took Mike to drop him off because he knew I couldn't do it. Things like that, just stepping in to some of those situations.
It's really comforting to know that other Christians are supporting the family back home while deployed.
It's important when the congregation just steps up and says, how's it going? Because sometimes you just need somebody to talk to that can share in your burdens.
Without our faith, I don't know how our family would continue, or our relationship, Katie and I's, would continue to stay strong. And even the conversation with the kids, they sometimes have been anxious, very nervous or scared what might happen to Dad on a certain deployment or what we might be training for. And I always remind them, the Lord's in control. We have comfort in that, and it doesn't matter, and God will watch over them afterwards, regardless of what decision He makes.
Our ministry to the military works hard to develop robust congregational ministry to military members and their families. Our goal is to provide people who protect our nation with a supportive church family and called workers who are sensitive to the stresses of military life. You can join this ministry by registering congregational service members at wells.net/refer.
Any questions about our WELL's military services? I'm sorry, get that out of there. I think we saw 3 or 4 former members in that video at that time. It was kind of fun. Oops. Otherwise, we're going to go to the once and future king. Any questions about WELL's military services?
Do we have current people in our congregation that
Are deployed? No one that's deployed. So currently serving still, Nate Harris is still active in the reserves, and so he's a lieutenant colonel in Signal, so a lot of weekends he's gone into where their command is in Maryland. So the Harrises.
I can give an update on Tyler.
Please.
Tyler is currently in Hawaii, but in January he's going to his new command in Schroeder, Spain.
Oh, wow.
So, he'll be around, I guess, in February.
Great.
And then going to Virginia Beach for some schooling, and then on to Spain in October, I think.
What year is he in now in the Navy?
He's just completed 7.
Okay. That's a long time.
I guess he's got 3 more left.
Excellent.
So are these pastors that are kind of within different circuits that focus on this?
So what we do is we ask there to be a designated military contact pastor for each military installation. That usually it's one of the closer ones. Sometimes it becomes not great. Like I'm the military contact pastor for Fort Benning, which is not a great fit because it's 90 miles away. And but so generally speaking, all of those would be pastors who are like are pastoring a church, like the church you saw there in Savannah or Pooler. Our pastor there serves the congregation that is in Pooler, but also because it's close to Fort Stewart, he's the military contact pastor for that. So then what we try to do is get those military contact pastors together at conferences and workshops so that they can get better at doing that kind of work, because it is working with, as you kind of saw in the video, working with families too is more of a not a unique ministry application, but it's certainly different enough to merit some more training, I think. So when we last left off, Once and Future King, Vicar took us through David's fall, where he had his affair with Bathsheba, where he orchestrated the murder of her husband, and then Nathan the prophet came and told him that story, led David to condemn himself. He repented. God said through Nathan, I've taken away your sin, you're not going to die. But he also gave another prophecy, a prophecy that must have caused great consternation for David. You are the man. And this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you. He will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. That is not a very comforting prophecy, right? Right? And you can see that from the point of Bathsheba onward, the biblical account about David now kind of centers around how this prophecy comes true. Like, we're going to take a look. If I passed out a copy of this, if you can't read it. This is David's family tree. Remember last time we talked about, are there examples of good things or bad things that happen when you have multiple wives? Here are all of David's wives up there in the red or pink. And the children that he has. Some of the ones I want you to kind of focus on, this could be the subject of our story today, would be Absalom and Tamar, and son Amnon. And eventually, we heard last week about the dead son of David, and then another son of David through Bathsheba named Solomon. Those are kind of the major players that we're going to talk about today. And you can see the prophecy of calamity against David coming from his own house, and it begins with his oldest son named Amnon. Amnon was the presumptive heir, but Amnon was infatuated with his half-sister Tamar. Tamar, who was a full sister to the son of David called Absalom. Absalom, if you remember Absalom, he was a son of David. He was known as being exceptionally beautiful, and they also said the same thing about his sister Tamar, that she was exceptionally beautiful. And Amnon, of course, he was infatuated with her. He ended up setting her up into a situation where he could rape her. And he raped his half-sister Tamar, and then it says it's a tragic line. She says, "Don't, my brother, don't force me, don't do such a thing." Then Amnon, he was stronger than her, and he raped her. And then verse 15 of chapter 13 says, "Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, 'Get up and get out.'" Terrible, shocking thing, right? Well, Tamar goes back, and her brother Absalom figures it out. And he says to her, Don't say anything to anyone. And then Absalom said nothing to Amnon for 2 years. And then 2 years later, Absalom killed his half-brother. So Absalom kills his half-brother. We find out during this process that King David had found out about what Amnon did to Tamar, but David did nothing about it. He said he was terribly furious, but he didn't do anything to Amnon. Absalom ends up killing Amnon, and David's furious about that, but really didn't do anything about it. Absalom takes off and lives in exile for a little bit, but David never ends up standing up to Absalom either. And you're starting to see a pattern in David's life that he's not willing to do what he needs to do to set his family straight. All right, so we kind of get to the backstory then of Absalom. In chapters 15 and 19, you find out some things about this man Absalom. So after he kills Amnon, he is the next oldest son of David. He's born of Maacah, who was the daughter of the king of Geshur. So actually Absalom is royalty on both sides, King David, and he's royalty through his mother as well. He had beautiful hair, great hair, great charisma. He took revenge, then he was banished, and then Joab, if you guys remember Joab, the nephew of David, who was always the general of his army, he orchestrated to bring Absalom back because he could see how David mourned for having lost Absalom. And so then Absalom comes back, and now he's in a state of restoration. And then let's take a look and see what happens. We're in chapter 15 of 2 Samuel. Anybody got a page number for that?
494.
494. All right, oops. No, the screen's already broken. Just kidding. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road. Why does he get chariots and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him? He looks like a king, yeah. Yeah, you think about like when the president comes through town and you've got security in front and security in back. Yeah, that's what it would look like. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading into the city. And whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him. "What town are you from?" He would answer. "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case would come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." Also, when anyone approached to bow down to him, Absalom would reach out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I've made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I'll worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileadite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword." The king's officials answered him, "Your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses." The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. All right, you're going to meet in small groups. Remember to introduce yourselves, just in case you don't know who everybody is, or they maybe can't remember your name. Think about maybe these 5 questions if you want to. Again, you can talk about whatever you'd like to, chase whatever rabbits you want. But here's some questions that I would think that I found interesting. We're going to take 5 or 6 minutes. Ready, set, go. I'm going to get coffee.
people, he was kind of aggressive, assertive, to state what he was doing. He was a little bit.
And Absalom knew that David
What did you talk about? What did you find interesting? What questions did you have? Where's Hebron? Okay, well, that's a good question. So Hebron, so that probably was the hardest question. Why did Absalom choose Hebron as the seat of his rebellion? Anybody know anything about Hebron? Yeah, so he was, remember after King Saul dies in battle, David becomes king in Hebron of Judah. So Hebron was the capital of Judah, and David was proclaimed king there of Judah, right? And so now Absalom, the family history is you get proclaimed king at Hebron, right? That'd be one thing. Another reason he would pick Hebron, and you have to really kind of be paying attention all the way back in chapter 3, is that this is where he was born. So this is Absalom's birthplace. It's the place where the last Davidic king was proclaimed. And kind of geopolitically, something else happened. Hebron was the capital of Israel. And then what happened? You remember? When David captured a city from the Jebusites called Jerusalem. And he took it and called it the city of David, and that's where he ruled. So he moved the capital. That means there probably were a bunch of ticked off people in Hebron, right? Like if you read back at the during the Revolutionary War and its aftermath, when we were trying to determine where the capital of the new country should be, you could get a feeling for how raw that could be. Eventually, we decided to carve out a little place and call it the District of Columbia. It's not in any state, right? Same thing. So here's the thing: it's his familial birthplace. It's a place where Davidic kings had been proclaimed before, and there's probably a lot of resentment against David there for having moved the capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. So that's good. Yeah, good. Excellent. What else do you guys talk about or questions you had? Please.
It seems like as David got older, he made poor choices.
Yeah. What poor choices did you see here?
But when he was younger, he was very firm in what he believed. Especially, they document what he did dealing with Saul. He was very adamant that he was not going to do this, he was not going to do that, in terms of killing Saul. But yet, towards the end of his life, it sounds like he's getting kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah. So we probably think this is probably the last decade of David's life. And in this account, you can see in this account, I think, something we can infer about David. Did you, like, to support what Scott was just saying there, that David in his last decade was not willing to make hard choices. Did you notice this thing about Absalom? How long did it go on?
4 years.
4 years, yeah. So you let somebody try to act like they're usurping your throne. It's not far away. He's setting up on the road into certainly David knew about this. Certainly, if he had any advisor worth his salt, they'd be like, you know what Absalom's doing, right? And he let him do it for 4 years. Yeah, we can infer that David is not making hard choices right now.
Well, that's what I kind of thought. Was he just disengaged, or was he not paying attention, or he no longer cared?
Maybe, is there a D, all of the above? Ashley.
Well, the fact that God had this entire account written in the Bible, are we supposed to conclude that David's lack of action towards the rape of his daughter starts Absalom's path of rebellion? It's like the catalyst that begins the plotting and the planning.
Absolutely.
So if he had been his father and dealt with what had happened in his household, then maybe Absalom wouldn't have rebelled against him. Yeah,
do you think maybe sometimes children can take on traits of their parents? What do you think? How is it that what did Amnon learn from Daddy? Amnon learned from Daddy that women are there to be used, and I can take the ones I want. And what did he do? He used Tamar and took the one he wanted, and then he sent her away, treated her like garbage, right? He learned that from Dad, right? And Absalom, he learned something from Dad too. That if somebody stands in your way, you know what you do?
Take him out.
You kill him. Yeah, I think absolutely, Ashley, that this is that prophecy that God gave through Nathan, and we're seeing it all, a catalyst from David's actions. And could he have stopped some of these chains? Well, God's prophecy was going to come true. But I think what we see here is that even in the stuff that fulfills this prophecy, because kind of like when you see that prophecy of God saying, I'm gonna do some terrible things to your family, you're like, that doesn't seem a whole lot like God, right? That seems kind of vindictive. And then you find out, well, all those things are gonna happen because of choices you're gonna make, David. This prophecy is gonna come true, but it's gonna come true because of you, David. Yeah. I saw a hand, Don?
Well, and that's what I was wondering too, because of Nathan's prophecy, was David just kind of relinquished himself to, okay, stuff's just gonna happen, and
we don't know. I will say that throughout this section of 2 Samuel, you see David refusing to take action, especially when it comes to his family, and then it leads to these consequences, right? He didn't do anything about Amnon. When Amnon raped Tamar, that led to Absalom. He didn't really do anything to Absalom, and now that let Absalom see that my dad's weak, my dad's old, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Hebron, proclaim myself king. Jim and Jamie?
Well, it's interesting that the account of Amnon and all this is immediately after he gets rebuked.
Yeah.
Right, immediately, and then his son dies. And I think that might have some impact on a fella, right? So his son died, and now you look at this list of people that he's accountable for, right? And he's tired, right? And he's probably just like,
yeah. We seem to find David at a place where he's no longer acting like a king.
Right.
That's what you're going to see through this account.
Do you think that he could have, I mean, he still loves his son, and if he's doing something to where he's gaining power to be able to take over the throne, then do you think he could justify it and say, you know what, he's going to be the next, or just kind of let it happen?
Yeah, I think sometimes we can believe the best things about our children even when everybody else would be saying, no, I know you think your children are fine, they're not fine. That's I think that's an issue here. David probably could have said that to himself and have said, well, he's apprenticing for the big job. And because again, the other thing is there's no such thing as guaranteed dynastic succession in Israel. I mean, the last king was Saul, the next king was David. There hasn't been a next king yet. So the idea that the next king would be the oldest son of David, there's no guarantee for that. And that's, I think, why Absalom is making the pitch. But then the problem was he made the pitch for 4 years, and then he realized, I have the hearts of all of Israel. Why don't I just go ahead and do this thing? Yeah. Ashley?
Do we know, I'm looking at the chart of the people, the heirs, and it shows that, so Bathsheba, they have the son who dies.
Yep.
But then she gives birth 4 more times.
Yes.
At least that's written down. So do we know if Amnon and Tamar and Absalom, are they much older because they came from the earlier wives?
Yes.
But so I just failed to say we could look at David and say he's just kind of giving if he's older because he still then births or sires 4 more children after that.
Yes, so then I think though there's in the timeline, so David and Bathsheba, and then the Absalom thing, I think it occurs right next to each other in the biblical account. But it seems like, because it says somewhere in there when I think Absalom was 40 years old. So that stretches that timeline out and leaves room for David to be ruling, having kids, all that stuff. And then this Absalom thing happens later.
So David's like 60-ish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, David would be in his 60s, like probably the last decade of his life. And so there was time between the Bathsheba incident and the Amnon Tamar incident. Okay.
Well, just real quick, as parents of adult children, it's easy to say, well, they're adults, they're going to make up their own mind, they're going to do what they want. And so but maybe the lesson is if you see that they're doing something that's going in the wrong direction, you have to at least try. Right?
Well, and the other thing, for you and I, that's a true statement. With David, he had another layer on here. He was also the law, right? He was the law. Like you and I, if our kid murders somebody or rapes somebody, the law has something to say about that, right? Regardless of what we do with it or don't do with it. David was also the law, and he didn't do anything. Yeah.
There's a line I use with my kids. Sorry. But whenever something's going on and you assume something about something, that's a bad place to be. So I will say, I'm going to be explicit right now. You might not want to hear what I'm going to say, but I'm going to be explicit so that you understand where I stand.
Yeah.
And I don't think David was doing it.
David was unwilling. I think they call that sharing an uncomfortable truth, maybe. David certainly seemed unwilling or distracted or tired or whatever it was. Or maybe he had in his mind, as Chris said, enough excuses as to say why this was plausibly okay. But Absalom showed it wasn't, because now you see David running for his life, right? And then, let me get to, we had our treachery, now we've got betrayal. You saw in there, Ahithophel went over to Absalom. Ahithophel was one of David's special counselors. If you look at those references, you'll find out that his counsel was considered like words from God himself. He was that kind of a consigliere for the king. Even wilder is if you look at the second 2 references, you find out two more things. One of which is that he's the father of one of David's mighty men. So his family has been involved with loyalty to David and heroics for David's whole life. And his granddaughter is a lady named Bathsheba. Yeah, right? So what's the impact of Ahithophel joining the rebellion? I mean, think about that. Your counselor who has a voice that speaks like from God himself, the father of one of your mighty heroes of war, the grandfather of your wife. Now, why would Ahithophel make that change? Leave David and go over. What do you think, Jane Grace?
Maybe he suspected that David had done what he had done.
Yeah, there's a real thought to that. Maybe Ahithophel knew exactly what happened and the ill treatment that his daughter and his son-in-law had gotten at the hands of this king. Yeah, that's one. Maybe another. If he is as smart as everybody said he was, then what?
Then he knew the prophecy and knew that David would fall.
And knew that the hearts of all of Israel were with Absalom. We're going to find out that Absalom's rebellion should have took. Ahithophel had chosen the winning side, without any question. But God had a plan too. Right? It's interesting. Go ahead, Don.
Can you go back to that other question though that you went over? What was the irony in verse 16?
Oh, irony in verse 16. David takes his whole household, but who does he leave behind? Concubines. He decides on leaving 10 concubines. Remember the prophecy? David was even going to be part of that decision too. He didn't protect the people he was supposed to protect. Right? So even these things where God said, I'm going to, what you did in the dark, I'm going to do in the daylight before all Israel. That too was going to be a choice that came from David's actions. Yeah. Jim.
Think about that decision. I'm going to be overthrown, so let's all run away. But you 10 stay here and take care of the palace.
And they're going to put the city to the sword.
Okay.
Why would you need to protect it? That's what I kept thinking.
I think he knew, like, maybe if I leave these 10, because God said that this was gonna happen anyways, maybe I can spare the rest of my people. They were expendable.
Maybe.
They were the least important people in his entire group. So, they were expendable.
Yeah, it's interesting when Ahithophel, when he gives advice to Absalom about how to make the rebellion hold, you know what his advice was? Go sleep with your father's wives. And then they pitched a tent on top of the palace, the same rooftop from which David looked out and saw Bathsheba. And then Israel watched as Absalom slept with the king's wives. God said, what you did in the dark, I'm going to do in the daylight. Ahithophel said, do this and you'll become a stench in your father's nostrils. And this will convince everyone that's on your side that there's no way you could possibly ever go back to the king and leave them out on the, because if you commit to a rebellion and then Absalom changes his mind, guess who's going to be dead? We already know that David's not going to kill his son Absalom, but everyone that was on the side of the rebellion. So you do this, you'll be enough of a stench in your father's nostrils that we're going to solidify everyone that's in the rebellion. That level of, so that advice came from David's close personal friend and counselor Ahithophel. That's where when David writes about this in Psalm 41. Let me read it to you real quickly. Psalm 41. Even my close friend whom I trusted, he who shared my bread has lifted up his heel against me. Does that remind you of anything in the New Testament? Judas. Yeah. In fact, Jesus quotes this psalm when he says he's going to be betrayed by one of his disciples. Ahithophel here is a type of Jesus. It's interesting. We'll find out that it's a type that's fulfilled in a bunch of different ways. But Jesus makes that connection himself on Holy Thursday evening. Yeah. So kind of cool espionage also. Hushai the Archite was on David's side, but he joined the rebellion as a spy. He convinced the rebellion not to listen to Ahithophel. Ahithophel encouraged immediate action, strike while David only has his 600 men, strike him while he's outside of the city. And Hushai the Archite, he gave advice, no, you got to wait and amass a great big army, because remember, David and his fighters they're lions. And of course, Ahithophel knew that if you in a rebellion don't move right now, you're not going to move at all. So he went home and he hung himself. Just, why would he take such rash action? What do you think? Don?
Because he betrayed David, and if David is still going to be king and has an army, he could send somebody to kill him.
Yeah, Ahithophel, again, he was known as the super smart guy, the consigliere that doesn't get anything wrong. And he was smart enough to realize that this advice that they were taking was going to result in the crushing of the rebellion, and then, of course, Ahithophel would need to be killed. Although it's interesting, like the two references I put there in chapter 17, verse 25, and 19, verse 13 is interesting because what Absalom does, he takes a guy named Amasa, and he makes him the commander of his army. And what's really interesting is after David wins in this rebellion, he takes Amasa, the head of the foreign army, and he makes him commander of his army in place of Joab. So Ahithophel might have found himself in a place of mercy, but we don't know. He didn't wait to find that out. Amasa did. Yeah. Realpolitik. That's what the Germans use this word to describe governing in a way that doesn't have anything to do with morals or ethics, but just practical consequences. That's realpolitik. Let's take a look at that in verse 18, chapter 18, verse 4. Let's see. So they're getting ready to go out and battle Absalom. And they'd taken the espionage work. They're in a position of power. Verse 4, so the king stood beside the gate while all the men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. And the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. The army marched into the field to fight Israel. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. When one of the men saw this, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in the oak tree. Joab said to the man, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him down to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. Man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lift my hand against the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai protect the young man Absalom. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand, plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. Then 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded him, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and they took Absalom, threw him in a big pit in the forest, piled up a large heap of rocks. Verse 18. Oh, that verse 18 doesn't matter. Yeah, so how about this? What irony do you find in Absalom's predicament? Correct, exactly. The hair he was so proud of ended up being his undoing. How about evaluate Joab's action with Absalom there? What do you think? He did right? He did wrong?
He did what was required.
Did what was required, certainly. He certainly knew that the only way for Absalom to stop being a threat to David was for Absalom to be dead. What else do you think? What do you think, Vicar?
It was very on par for Joab to react like this, and he killed other people. Some people wanted to kill him, and probably see David being so hesitant in his decision making.
Joab has a history of always doing the things that David wouldn't do, and most of the time it was for David's benefit. Once in a while, because Joab wanted to kill somebody. But when he did them, this without any question, he did for David's benefit. He did what David, he knew, wouldn't be able to do. Go ahead, great.
But if he's going against what David said.
Correct.
So he put his life in jeopardy at that point by disobeying the king's order?
He sure should have been, right? He ended up getting demoted. He got removed from being the commander of the army, and the enemy general takes his place. Joab solves that a little bit later, goes to give the guy a hug, has a dagger in his hand, spills his guts out on the ground. So then he goes to be the commander-in-chief again.
This kind of goes back to David being kind of a lame duck king.
Correct.
Right, so you know he's on the way out, so he's not taking action.
He's not, and that's the thing. You see David in all of this not acting as king anymore, and Joab killing who he wants to kill. He gets demoted, so he kills the guy who took his place and then just assumes the commander-in-chief position again. And then even here, his interaction with David at the end of the chapter, it's right, but think about this and how it goes down. So end of the chapter 18, the king was shaken, and when he finds out Absalom's dead, and he cries out, "Oh, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Verse chapter 19, Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." For the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, "O Absalom, my son." Joab goes into the house and says to the king, "Today you have humiliated all your men who just saved your life, the lives of your sons and daughters, and your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth till now." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway, and the men were told, "The king is sitting in the gateway," and they all came before him. David needed to hear that, but think about the fact that someone could speak to the king that way, right? What we're seeing is, we had seen the zenith of David's reign, and now we're seeing its nadir, right? We're seeing him, these prophecies from Nathan are coming true. We see him not acting as the king he's supposed to be, and we're going to find out that this downward trajectory is going to continue. Next week we're going to find out finally all the way to the death of King David, but it's got a twist. It's got an interesting twist that actually became part of a huge cinema an Oscar-winning film. We'll see if you can figure out which one it is. Next week, Sunday, 9:30. Thank you.